Hi, good evening. Welcome to the first of our two May Historic Preservation Commission meetings. It is Tuesday, May 7th, 6:50 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And before proceeding, I should give our standard disclaimer that pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Historic Preservation Commission will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of the agenda. And as is our custom, we'll do our introductions for the commission, starting with Mr. Coughlin.
Hi, my name is Dan Coughlin, and I live in a historic district in a historic building.
Thank you. And Ms. Price.
Hi, my name is Denise Price, and I live in a historic district in a lovely brick building.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kelly.
Hi, I'm Robin Kelly. I am the Realtor member of the commission, and I'm also a historic homeowner in Union Square.
Thanks. And Mr. Falvey.
Hi, I'm Ryan Falvey. I live in Ward 2.
Thanks. And we have a member of staff with us tonight. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Steve Carey in Planning Preservation Zoning.
Thanks. Oh, and I didn't myself. I am Eric Parks, an architect, resident of Ward 3 and historic homeowner. Okay, and we have one item on the or one public hearing on our agenda tonight. And let me just get my screen back again here. This is HP 24-000001. Address is 382 Broadway. Applicant is Garrett Innes. Owner is 382 Broadway LLC. And this is a determination of preferably preserved to the second stage in the demolition delay ordinance process. Is the applicant here tonight?
This is Steve Carey in the Planning Division. I do see David Innes and Garrett Innes. I can promote them to panelist. Give me one moment. They should be rejoining shortly as panelists. I also see an Evan Stellman with his hand raised. Hi, Garrett. Is Evan Stellman part of your development team as well?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
putting him on as well.
Sure.
Okay. If you're all here, just why don't you give us a quick rundown of what's new or synopsis of things as they stand now with your demolition request.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I gave a pretty good rundown last time of, how we ended up where we are today, unfortunately. And I'd love to kind of hand it off to our architect, Evan, to give everyone a rundown of what the project was, what we had originally planned to do with the building until the building department told us to, do an addition to the front as well in order to conform with all the zoning regulations. And then what we, then ultimately what was approved by the city and where we are today. So at this point, I'd love to hand it off to Evan.
Sure,
Okay.
I'll just share my screen. It says host disabled participant screen.
Sure. Give me one moment and I will
Okay,
make you
no worries.
the host, and you should have that capability. One moment.
Beautiful. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes. At least I
Okay,
can.
so this is the property located at 382 Broadway. The previous meeting, you determined that you would like to see it again. I've updated this set to include the current demolition percentage based off of what has been demolished in the field. I'll just skip ahead to the site plan. So this is our proposed site plan. Broadway is at the bottom of the sheet here. This diagonal dashed region here is the outline of the existing structure. What we're proposing now, which was approved by the city, is building in front of the property up until the 10-foot minimum front yard setback. And we're also proposing to build above and out behind the property. We're proposing a driveway to the left side and 10 parking spaces at the rear of the site. I won't walk through the floor plans. I can come back to them if there's any questions on them later. These are the current demolition plans. As you can see, a majority of the front facade, basically all of the front facade, as shown on the bottom right here, has been demolished. The rear facade has been demolished. The right side elevation has been demolished, and then there's a portion on the left side which was saved. In total, the proposed demolition is 86% of the existing surface area. Moving on to the proposed exterior of the structure, this top elevation here is the front elevation. We're proposing a 2.5-story structure clad with cementitious siding for a majority of the structure. And then there's some PVC board and batten elements on the bays and at the gable and the cross gables. This bottom elevation here is the left side elevation as you're viewing the structure from Broadway. Again, a majority of it is clad with cementitious siding. The cross gable and dormers are clad with PVC board and batten. And I'll just highlight, we have some decks cantilevering over the parking at the rear of the site. This top elevation here is the rear elevation. We're cladding it again with cementitious siding on the first 2 floors and then transition to PVC board and batten, similar to the existing structure on the gable. This bottom elevation here is the right side elevation as you view the property from Broadway. You can see we're bringing the board and batten down to the grade at the bay, and then cladding the gable and dormer with board and batten again. And these are the proposed perspectives of the structure. This top right one is a view from Broadway looking at the left side of the structure. Again, where the existing structure kind of ends right here where you can see the foundation transition materials. We're proposing to build in front of it, across, and then up. This bottom elevation here is a view from Broadway looking at the right side. The existing structure ends kind of where this cross gable is. And again, we're proposing to build in front of it and upwards. And that's all that we're proposing. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Gary.
No, not that I can think of. You know, I don't know if you were going to show them what we had originally proposed before this project. I mean, if you want to show them, but you know, we wanted to preserve as much of this building as we could. That's why originally we kept the facade of the building where it was, and we just proposed an addition to the rear. And this took a while. There's a lot of, you know, back and forth with the city. And then at a certain point, they said, you know, that doesn't matter if it's pre-existing non-conforming, that you have to conform to the new zoning regulations in the UR district. So we couldn't really do anything to the house unless it made the entire house conform to the zoning regulations. So it's either, you know, keep it as it was, or, you know, or do an addition to make it larger. And also, you know, then we have to do an addition in the front as well. So,
And this is what we had proposed initially, saving the front facade of the structure and building up and back. But we were told that we had to bring it up to the minimum front setback of 10 feet. So that's why we were forced to do this scheme. Chairperson Parks, I see that you're speaking, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, traffic. if you're all set, I was saying we were going to move to public comment next if you want to add anything else. Otherwise, that's what our next step will be.
Okay.
And that you'll be a chance to respond to things, questions of you. So any members of the public who'd like to speak in this case, please raise your hand and staff will unmute you. Please state your name and your address when you speak.
Steve Carey in the planning division. Sean Fritz, I'm going to unmute you. You'll need to unmute yourself on your end. Sean Fritz, you should be able to speak now.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
We can. We're getting a bit of feedback.
Yeah. Any way to mix that up?
Unfortunately, not on our end. What we can do is we can come back to you. There's a couple other people. I think that's better.
Okay.
Oh, no, still there. Why don't we come back to you? We have a couple other people with their hands raised, but we'll come back to you to see if you can work out that issue. Is that all right?
All right, thank you.
Sure. I'm going to unmute Ron Cavallo. Mr. Cavallo, you're unmuted on this end. You'll have to unmute yourself on your end.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Ron Cavallo, 70 Victoria Street, Somerville. I don't know about the legality of any of this. I just know that I'm a concerned citizen, and I'm very concerned about Broadway in general. So my comments are going to be about this structure and about Broadway, which is an important street. And the first thing I want to say is that I do think that this is a very attractive structure. And again, I don't know the legality of any of this. It takes some deep digging, and I'm sure planning will have something to say about it. But when I view the plan here, I support it. I think it's an attractive structure. I think it would be a benefit to the city. But I want to talk about Broadway in general, which in my mind is problematic as just about every street in the city of Somerville, all of which are pretty much in extreme states of disrepair. But I want to start at Ball Square, where there's the burned out laundry, and I know the owner of that laundromat, and that laundry is involved in insurance litigation, will probably be in a burned out state for at least a year and a half, which is not good. I also note that there are vacant storefronts in Ball Square, and I think given what's going on with the retail and commercial sector, that's problematic in and of itself. With regard to the gas station, which is further up Broadway, that has been in a stalled state for, at this point, years. And I was part of the process of neighborhood outreach and supported the structure that the family that owns that site wanted to build there. It has yet to be built. It's vacant. It's unattractive. We go further up Broadway.
Mr. Cavallo, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Steve Carey with Planning, Preservation, and Zoning. I would remind you that the scope of your comment should be relative to 382 Broadway. And you do have about 30 to 45 seconds left of your 2 minutes.
I hear you, and I would like to have a little bit of extra time and be respected, because I'm trying to convey that I am expressing concerns about Broadway in general, which I think if one looks at the city holistically are very relevant. Now, I've just lost some time. I'd like an extended 30 seconds. Are we in agreement?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. We go further up Broadway and we look at the package store, which has been a wretched, vacant mess for years at this point. It's an embarrassment. Now we go further up Broadway and we know that ultimately the Star Market will be developed, but it has been decades in such a sorry state. And then we look at the condition of Broadway in general, which is wretched and consistent with what's going on all over the city with all the deferred maintenance to the infrastructure. My concern here is that this project would end up being in extended delays and be part of what I think is a very sad state of Broadway. I don't want to see that. I think that this is a very good building. Please don't interrupt me. I think that this is a very good building, and I am saddened by the overall state of Broadway. The city of Somerville has been in the news, most of which has been negative for various reasons. I do not want to look at this at an unfinished building for years and years and years, nor do I want to see this developer go into bankruptcy potentially. I think that's very bad.
Good, thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. All right, next up we have Teresa Dovidio. Teresa, I'm going to unmute you on our end. You'll need to unmute yourself on your end.
Got it. So where is
Teresa, I
the
just remind you to please state your name and address for the record.
Teresa Davidio? I live in the carriage house at 170 Sycamore, behind the 380 Broadway.
Thank you.
And yes, and I've grown up in the 380 Broadway. So my question is, you said 10 feet minimum. It's not 10 feet. It's smaller than 10 feet. Is that correct?
What is smaller than 10 feet?
The distance
I
to
can
the side.
check the site plan. So this dashed red line is the 10-foot setback. We're
Okay.
proposing a porch that goes into the 10-foot setback.
That goes right on top of, yeah. So when you propose this, do you ever put another house next to it that goes back? Okay, I guess I'm asking the planning question. Why is it that they could not set back in order to keep the line of the street?
So it was a zoning parameter that when you
I
change.
understand, I'm asking the zoning.
Okay, sure.
Zoning's here, right?
This is Steve Carey, the planning division. We don't have someone from inspectional services here that would be able to speak to zone compliance. You're welcome to put a question in email to planning@somervillema.gov and we can get that answer for you.
Okay, so
I think
anyway,
Evan, the architect, may be fairly well versed with the zoning for this particular property, so he may be able to answer your question.
when the person was here last meeting, they said that it was a misunderstanding, that that coming out that far was not what they were saying. That's what my interpretation of what happened at the last meeting. That's why I was hoping that something could be done about the fact that it is destroying the street line. I mean, of all the places that you could build this thing, this is like not even the place, especially since you tore down the house anyway. You know, so you might as well have gone into an empty lot somewhere. Didn't really matter whether you were here or not. You know, it's like you're taking stock of the fact that we have kept our houses absolutely gorgeous around this neighborhood. And so the neighborhood, you know, it's nice to be in. And then you plop down this thing that you destroy the line of the street and you put in 10 apartments. Like, you want to make a lot of money, and we know you don't live here, you know, and you're probably not going to live in any of these, right? And they're probably not going to be, you may have one housing, you know, low-income housing, but the rest of them are going to just travel through this thing. It's not going to produce any kind of community, because most people are just going to be living there for 2 years and then moving out again. And then you're taking a yard that was pretty much a yard in the back, the driveway was there, but a yard in the back where it had a lot of green space, and the leftover beautiful trees that are still here, okay, are now going to be all, what are you going to do back there? You're going to tar it over? You know, I mean, it's like, I don't get it. And plus, you're not even taking account the fact that you destroyed some parts of the halfway house that were next to you. Plus, my retaining wall is falling down. I mean, I have evidence of throughout your building, and now it is cracked in multiple places and falling in. And you haven't dealt with the engineering aspect of this building in that space.
Teresa, I would just remind you that there's a 2-minute limit, so if you want
I
to just
know,
wrap up your
that's all I
comments.
can say. I mean, it's really, the way this, I would rather have them be fined. This is like a punishment thing. They're getting their way of what they wanted to do. They let this building fall into disrepair and didn't want to take care of it. And then they went ahead and did what they wanted to do. And this is what they want to do. I'm over.
Okay, thank you. And just to, I hear your comments. A reminder to folks, this is a determination of preferably preserved. So technically, we're reviewing the existing structure that was there. I know it seems it's a little bit odd because it's no longer existing, but we're not really addressing the details of the layout of what would there. Our decision tonight is whether that structure ought to be or ought to have been preserved or not. And
Yes,
also,
it should have been reserved.
yeah. Also, just to keep things flowing, we're just going to collect public comments and then we'll give the applicant a moment to answer questions or respond so we can keep things flowing more directly with the comments.
Great. So let's, this is Steve Carey in the planning division. Let's try Sean Fritz again. Sean, again, I'll unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end and hopefully that feedback issue is solved.
Hello, can you hear me?
You can. You may want to try turning down the volume on your computer because it may be that your computer speaker is getting then picked up again in your own microphone.
Can you hear me now?
It's better. Yes, there's a very, very little feedback.
Okay, my name is Sean. I live at 162 Sycamore Street in Somerville. I go to a lot of architectural preservation meetings and I've said this before, I've stated it. I think the developer was absolutely disingenuous when he said there was a safety issue. This is a historic preservation meeting to decide whether an existing structure was historic or wasn't historic and whether he could take it down. I don't even understand the proceeding. I think he usurped everyone's authority. The architect is a little disingenuous with all of his drawings. Why don't you put in houses that are already existing on the left and the right side of those drawings? Right? The setbacks are just insane to me. Like, I wouldn't want to live on the house to the left or the right of that. And I know they keep on blaming the city, but if you had kept the existing structure intact and you let historic preservation look at the plan first, I don't think you would automatically have to build it out. You're trying to blame the city, the architect and the developers. They tore the whole thing apart. There was holes in the roof for years. I watched it. I live right around the corner. There was absolutely, they were looking to tear the thing down. It's absolutely disingenuous. I think it's ridiculous what he's done. And he doesn't live here. He doesn't live in the community. We haven't had to watch this ugly box that blocks sunlight for years. The thing is atrocious. There's nothing you can do now. So you know what you do with a lot of developers I know in Boston. You do what you're going to do. You do it anyways. You pray for forgiveness and you're actually going to get what you probably want. I don't know how you can deem two clapboards and a piece of stone historic and you have to keep it because you tore it down. And don't give us some nonsense about, oh, safety issues or worker safety. I've been in the trades for decades. Yeah, I watched the whole thing go on. It's disingenuous. And if the city did make you do that, I don't understand that either in climate change. We're using all the hardscape, building out to the front. Doesn't make any sense to me, but thank you very much for listening to my opinion.
Thank you.
Great. Next up, I see we have, one moment. We have Daniel Cronin. Mr. Cronin, I'm going to unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end and just a reminder to state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Daniel Cronin, 96 Broadway, in a listed building just adjacent to this building. And I'm wondering that this developer clearly was skirting the regulations and tearing down the entire building. Are there going to be any consequences of this? That's my question. I hope that will be answered at some point during this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, we'll get to that later on after comments.
Thank you. Next, I see Aaron Weber. Aaron, again, I'm going to unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end.
Hi, my name is Aaron Weber. I live at 32 Summit Avenue. I understand that construction can be disruptive to abutters, and we've heard concerns from neighbors, and I understand those. But we haven't heard from the 10 households who are going to be living in this building, who are going to be our neighbors, who are going to be members of our community. And while we deliberate, we should remember that we are in a severe housing crisis caused by severely delayed, severely underproduced, badly needed housing. I urge you to, at the very least, make your decision promptly, because housing delayed is housing denied. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I see Alan Schwickrath. Mr. Schwickrath, I'm going to unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end. Alan, you should be able to unmute yourself on your end.
There we go. Hi there. My name is Lisi Wall. I'm using my neighbor's computer, so you don't see my name up here.
Can you give us
So
your
I'm
address too,
really
please?
concerned about this developer. I find it hard to trust him. First, he sets up things so that then he has to tear down the historic building. That was sleazy. Second, he's building out into the sidewalk, breaking the pattern up and down the Broadway completely. And third, I'm not an architect, but I do have common sense. And when I walk by what is being built, I just see a bunch of chopsticks put together. I don't see anything that is substantial, any cement, anything. You know, I think he's going to do, this is going to have consequences for the people that move in as well. I don't trust him one bit. Thank you.
Thanks. And before we lose you, could you give your address for the record? Too late.
It's 390 Broadway.
Thank you.
This is Steve Carey in the Planning Division. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised who has not gotten to speak. Oh, I do see actually two more. Gretchen Whale Scott. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. I'm going to unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end.
Hi, good evening. This is Gretchen Worley Scott. I live at number 9 Browning Road, and my backyard abuts the property at 382 Broadway. First of all, I agree with others when I don't understand why the city would require the building to be built out farther, because a minimum setback is not a maximum setback. So you can always decide to not extend the building forward as far as you can. My concern is for the neighbors on all sides that have been disrupted. The parking lot, which looks really generous on the drawing, but is in reality not quite that generous. And also the extremely large trees that are on the property that will be dug up. The root structures will be dug up when they go to do the parking lot. I think that the building that they say that they're going to build looks reasonable. I don't understand why it had to come out and break the line on Broadway. And I just think that the whole way the developer went about this was, as a previous commenter said, sleazy, because I watched out my bathroom window the building fall into a state of disrepair, and I watched them take it down piece by piece by piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I do see David Innes. David, I will unmute you on our end. You'll have to unmute on your end.
Hello.
All right, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So listen, I've watched the townspeople and the historic commission browbeat and berate my son and my architect, and I just want to give you a little background. We had applied for a permit And we had waited 2 years to produce this product. The fact of the matter is, we could have, if we were trying to get away with anything, we could have gone to the Historic Commission, then they could have made a determination. We could have waited a year and done whatever we wanted. We didn't do that because we had no intention of trying to, how you say, get away with anything. We conformed to all the city setback requirements and came up with basically an award-winning design. Award-winning. It's the nicest looking building in the whole street. So I just want to let everyone know that we had no intention on, again, I might be repeating myself, but I want to drive home the point that there was no intention on circumventing anyone, breaking any laws. We tried to conform. It just didn't work out that way in the very end. But again, we could have gone and waited a year and done what we wanted, but that was not our intention. So that being said, I think that the board should show some compassion to my son, who has lost tens of thousands of dollars having this project sit. And you should understand, again, that there was nothing that was trying to be gotten away with. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you.
This is Steve Carey in the Planning Division. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. Yes, I don't see anyone else.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, I'll close the public comment portion of this hearing. And just we'll give the applicant a chance to respond to a few things. Just regarding the front setback issue, that is sort of beyond the scope of what we're here about tonight, because that is sort of like a situation that was brought to this by the project. So, you know, someone who chose to do something different with the site would, even if that were the case, would not necessarily have to do it. So we're not really reviewing whether the city should have said that or not, or if they did. That's sort of a question for phase 2 or something. And was there anything else that the applicant that was asked of you, if you want to respond to or answer people?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, you know, we made a project that was to conform with all the zoning laws. We went over the plans, the engineering plans and the architecture plans with our framer many, many, many times. They said they could do it. They did the first floor, and then they went over to the roof. And as they were cutting it, they said that they had to take it down in order to do it. And, you know, at that point, you know, we were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. At this point, it's been sitting for 5 months. We want to finish the project. Yes, it's costing us a ton of money. We don't want it to sit the way it is right now for another 18 months. You know, we just want to finish the project at this point. And hope that you can, you know, allow us to proceed.
Okay, thank you. With that, then I would turn it over to the commission. If you all want to offer your thoughts in no particular order.
Is there a way that we can stop sharing the screen? So we can see everybody? Okay, thank you. I mean, I can start. I think it goes without saying that the original streetscape certainly had a conformity that I think we would have, if the building hadn't been demolished, felt very strongly about. The other buildings on that kind of string of buildings are all historic in their own right. So I think that we would have said that the building would be preferably preserved. So I think that's where I continue to stand today. We talked about this last time, but that's my opinion hasn't changed.
Thank you.
I agree, that, you know, in this process where we are tasked with understanding and deciding whether the property is preferably preserved as it had stood before it was demolished, it very much was preferably preserved. And I don't know how or why the stage of coming to historic didn't happen prior to any discussions of plans that would pull the building forward and demolish 86%, which is clearly requiring you know, demolition approval from historic. So I don't know how that got to be. And, you know, simply because the zoning for a blank canvas lot would allow for something doesn't mean that that same lot with a historic structure on it can be built out to its maximum. And while I understand the urgency for building more housing in Somerville and for generating taxes and all of the things that various commenters relayed, there are only a handful of properties that come before historic any given month in any given year. It's a very limited number across this city. There are many other opportunities where these properties can be built without destroying the cultural historic fabric of the city that belongs to the people of the city. And so I am incredibly disappointed, upset, feel very much for the neighbors who have observed this and have seen this property destroyed. You know, for the developer, I think this was, you know, an Icarus situation, flying a bit too close to the sun, you know, trying to maximize something on a lot that couldn't be maximized. But I would like to see this property preserved.
Thank you. Yeah, I have, if you look at this, what we're really looking at is the house that was there. If this had come to us as at a hearing of whether we should preferably preserve that structure, it would be sort of a slam dunk that way. And I feel like to say, no, that's okay, poor you, you've knocked it down and you put something else there, it's sort of like rewarding something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. So, you know, would this drag out 18 months? It may well not. It kind of depends on how things work out. This would begin a period where we would interact with you. And yes, you do have the option of waiting it out. I don't think that you would want to do that. But I would concur with Vice Chair Kelly. We can't really use our need for housing as carte blanche to knock down any house that stands in the way of a proposed development, because we have relatively few spots that have that sort of merit in the city. And I don't think you could look at that as being a big factor in which buildings come and go, or projects come and go. The issue with the setback in the front, you know, I have concerns at this, what that really fleshed out to, but at this point in the process, that is really not a factor in this decision, because that, as I mentioned before, is something that was brought to the situation by the proposed project, which was to add a whole bunch of units. So, you know, if someone wanted to make a single family out of it, whatever, that wouldn't have been an issue. So that's sort of like a circumstance that was brought to this building by this proposed project. So I would concur with the others spoken so far in my commission. How about you, Mr. Falvey? Any thoughts?
I mean, nothing additional. I appreciate the comments from, I mean, particularly Vice Chair Kelly. I really feel for the neighbors in that location that have been impacted by this, and there are guidelines that people are expected to follow to get things done, whether it be putting permeable drivers in their yard when they're doing landscaping, and have to be held up before the city approves that. I had to have a tree removed from my yard and I had to wait for like 2 months for the city to approve that. You know, and you just, I think for, you know, for all of us to feel comfortable living in the city, I think you expect that you're going to be dealing with people that are going to be following guidelines and adhering to them and trying to be cooperative and, you know, and following the same guidelines of law that are expected. And I feel as though that didn't happen here. And, you know, some of the people ask, well, what are the consequences? I'm not sure what the consequences should or need to be here. But I feel as though this would have been a slam dunk for us if we had just been voting on that property without any work or any changes that have been made to it, just looking at all the other properties that we viewed over the year. And I think to strip that away from, it's not a right that we have as a commission here, but that's really, you know, that is an impact on the neighborhood. And you hear about the setbacks and the impact on the street front, and, you know, people, you can see it really is an impact on people there. And I think it's just unfortunate that we're at this point. So I think, you know, I would have absolutely supported preferably preserved vote on this. I think we just have to figure out what's the best way to move forward on this. So you know, I appreciate the concerns and the comments that have been shared by everyone, but I don't think this is something you just look the other way and move forward on. Done.
Okay. Unless somebody has anything else to add, it sounds like we could entertain a motion.
I move that we vote to find the property preferably preserved.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Kelly for preferably preserved vote.
Second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Falvey. All in favor of the motion of Vice Chair Kelly?
Aye.
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 Opposed? We'll do a roll call. Mr. Cogman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And we need to adopt findings for this vote, which I would cite the, you know, well, what was originally there, the historic integrity that is a good reflection of its style, that was importance in the streetscape. Those are kind of this, I think, the same findings we had for the significance hearing.
Yes.
Those I think would roll through to this.
I move that we vote to adopt the findings as articulated by Chair Parks.
Okay, motion by Vice Chair Kelly,
I second.
seconded by Mr. Cogman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We'll do a roll call again. Mr. Cogman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. So folks, it's, you know, this is a period that can last up to 18 months, but I would suggest engaging as quickly as possible with staff. And obviously the goal would be to arrive at it, come up with a memorandum of agreement or understanding or something like that. And there'll be a few meetings. Anything you want to add, staff? I see Sarah has appeared. So no. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. In that case, that was our only case on the agenda. We have, I mean, a public hearing. We have several other things on our agenda, which are we're going to discuss internally. And the first one is, so we have, by the way, for the record, we have Ms. Price has come back. She was recused for the first hearing. And Mr. Coughlin, I think you're going to stick around, or what's your situation?
If it's okay, I have to leave.
Okay, well, we have a quorum without you.
Are there anything else, other items to vote on, or was that the only item to vote on?
That was it. We're gonna, oh no, we had the meeting minutes, which we can vote with the 4 of us.
Okay, great. I had no notes on the meeting minutes.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
you too.
See you soon. Bye.
Yep. So on our agenda was just a placeholder for a general discussion about how to advance historic district creation. This has kind of come up off and on. We've had opportunities come up. We have some, I don't know, 2 or 3 different spots where we need districts. The city is overworked, and we're just going to think of strategies of how we could advance potential historic districts that we've already talked about, and also in a more general sense, I'd like to develop a strategy for sort of advancing the historic district in Union Square, or at least the low-hanging fruit, as I would say, like the obvious, the most easy to identify as historic properties. Any other things people want to bring up, we can just talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two-story mansard, the collection on Glenwood, I would say the houses on Broadway between Sycamore and Central should be discussed. And then Union Square, and then the individual house on, I'm now blanking on the street, but very near the new Green Line station between Webster and Prospect. There's a house that the owners want to have designated.
Yeah, and they've been trying to do that.
Emerson.
Emerson Street.
Thank you.
Yeah. So obviously there's a question of resources. I know that you all are heavily overworked, and sort of strategy wise, how would we push this forward?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you. No, thanks. Glad I could be here tonight to talk about this. So let's tackle Union Square first, because that's the one that's been around the longest. And excuse me, has suffered the most from not having enough staff. So we had been talking internally for quite a while, and I think you'll be pleased about this, is that internally we've committed to submitting the Union Square LHD by the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so in our fiscal year, the first of the fiscal year is July 1st. So our fiscal year is different than the calendar year. So by the end of June, we would at least have submitted it to the state for their comment. So that doesn't obviously end the whole process, but that just kicks off their review and then, 60-day required quiet period. And so for anybody listening that's unaware of Union Square, is the Union Square neighborhood plan specifically calls for the creation of a local historic district in Union Square. Now, while there are some properties already designated, there's a larger swath of properties that were studied quite a while ago for inclusion as a larger district. There are many ways you could do it. To the members of the HPC, you could have it as one Union Square district, one large one. You could, pocket it in neighborhoods. So there are a variety of different ways you can break it up. But inclusive in that is also Emerson and the folks who are interested in specifically designating their 3 houses on Emerson. So that gets swept up in this effort as well.
Great.
So regarding the Glenwood one, that one we definitely can't tackle until fiscal year 25. So which obviously starts in July. What we have to do is figure out where that fits into our time frame. So we have to kind of assess what are some of the other issues we want to tackle, right? We have this 50% issue. We have a couple other challenges that we think that we as staff see with some of the language in the ordinance.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by the 50%?
The 50% as the threshold for demolition review.
Oh.
And the way people are, claiming less, but then it becomes more and whatnot. So, we, and when I say we, I mean planning and zoning is working with ISD. We'll be working with ISD on that because they're seeing obviously a lot of problems and challenges with that as well. I think everybody's tired of getting into the field and seeing what happens. So that's a priority for us. There's some other slight language modifications that we want to make in that ordinance. The other thing that we want to do, which is a collaborative effort with, I work in zoning as much as I work in preservation and always have, but with other members of the zoning side of the house to work on density and potential density incentives for properties that are first designated as local historic districts, right? So like if they're, let's say they're in an NR zone, like you can have like, now you can have 3 units, maybe you can have 4 units if you can fit in a backyard cottage, but maybe with some of these properties, like some of the larger, really large Victorian ones, for example, maybe it makes more sense to have a density of 5 or 6 units in one of these buildings. It's something that we have to study. And then from then on, we would move to looking at, you know, other larger non-designated properties. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at and that we have on our plate to tackle as high priorities. So then the question becomes, how can I allocate some of our staff to do the research on some of these properties on Partridge? Or is there a way where there are members of the commission who have time to do it, or to do certain parts of it, because it's a really long and involved and complicated process. So we have to think about the balance of getting it done with the time that potentially you have, with the time that then we would have to train and then review what you do and have it be an iterative process. So I'm not sure how to approach that yet.
And we can't simply ask for more support and staff to work on all the projects that the department isn't able to handle.
So from a staff perspective, we're not going to be getting more staff. Yeah. The only reason we got an additional staff person last year was because the city council, they can't give us staff, but they really made a push for it. But the last several years, we haven't been able to get what we've requested. And at some point, you also get to the point where like you can only throw so much staff at it. And if you don't have like, if you don't have really current systems, that can also hold you back too, right? Like, it's like sometimes it's like having a library and they're still functioning off of a card catalog instead of like, you know, LexisNexis would be like a big deal for them. So it's a combination of staff and systems. I think that with a couple of the newer staff members that we have, I think that there's certainly a possibility of definitely pulling them into that. I mean, one of them is with you tonight. And we're very, very grateful that he's here. And I hope he doesn't go running in the other direction when he hears what he's might end up doing.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but something like having an intern or a student who's doing a practicum or something where they are able to do that work that's, you know, also in some ways educational for them.
Sure.
You know, are there not opportunities to do that?
Right now, at this point in time, no, because any sort of programs for interns like that have already been filled for the summer. I will be honest with you, with some work that we've given interns in the past, I've been satisfied. Others, I'm very displeased, and I think it's a great educational opportunity. I think we find people who are less interested, unfortunately, in doing preservation than they are in, say, like zoning and housing and things like that. Maybe in the future, it would be a possibility, but for this summer, for example, in the fall, right now, no. If somebody hasn't worked with the types of research that we have to do before, there are a lot of things that are very non-intuitive, I think, for a lot of people who have never experienced it before. Especially those who are coming right out of school or are still in school. And there's definitely some teaching and training that we can do. It's a question of balancing how much time it is going to take of staff to train them and constantly review their work and constantly retrain versus what we'll actually get out of it. Is research into 5 properties sufficient for the amount of time it'll take us away from doing other things? I don't know. And I'm also of a firm belief that if we're going to have an internship program, if we're going to have interns, we need to have a specific set of rules, guidelines, and programs in place, which right now the department doesn't have. Otherwise, it becomes kind of ineffective for everybody. That's not to say that it's not something that we wouldn't look into. We definitely would. But right now, we're still trying to keep our heads above water. And so that hasn't been something that we've been able to look into for this summer.
It would seem that with the number of job openings, and obviously I don't know how the budget in the city really works, but
Yep.
there are dozens and dozens of open jobs that have just been open for a
That's
long
correct.
time, which means no one's being paid in those positions. And so there is available money. It just needs to be reallocated. And
We
so
can't. That's the problem. I
So
totally get what I totally 100% get what you're saying, but we can't reallocate funds from these other departments into ours, or even from one job title to another.
So then the budget that is for the job that has remained open for a year, they are, if that's an $80,000 a year job, that's just $80,000 that's sitting in that department's money, or is that sitting with the city to
distribute?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on, I mean, it depends on what the job is. Some might be usually the ones are grant funded or taken care of otherwise, but yeah, they're just sitting and unused. It's not for lack of trying.
But it's still, it's not going into a general fund. It's staying with whatever that department is.
At least for that fiscal year, I don't know what would happen. I don't know how that works then at the end of the fiscal year if it hasn't been allocated, if it just goes back into that department's funds again, or if it goes to like the general fund, that at that point, I don't know what happens to it after that. Yeah.
It seems problematic that one of the important tasks and responsibilities of historic can't be accomplished. That's not tenable, that's not okay. So
Oh, yeah.
it seems like that needs to be fixed.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
since city council has, they direct the commission.
Oh, they don't actually.
Well, I mean, the purview for historic comes from the city council.
So it's a mayoral appointment, and it's all mayoral appointees have to be approved by the city council.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean that I know that we are appointed. I mean the actual, our purview. So the authority that the commission has can be changed by city council. We are, it's not something that historic makes up for itself. We are simply fulfilling what has been dictated to us. And
right, what's in the municipal law, right, which is set by the council and approved by the mayor, correct?
Right, and so
Correct.
if they are saying this is, these are your tasks, this is what you can do, need to do, et cetera, but then they're not funding that work, that seems problematic.
Yeah, so I think that this is a challenge with every municipality and state government and federal government, is that, a lot of laws get passed, but they're not necessarily funded with additional budget. So this is the same challenge that ISD has, and it's the same challenge that we have in zoning. Whereas we had needed staff for a long, long time, and we're dying with the amount of work, and we just couldn't get the staff for it. We couldn't get the allocations. So, but we have to propose those allocations in order for them to be considered. So yes, so you guys see the unfortunate part of like what's your purview, which is this commission, right? And how the challenges that we have in taking on some initiatives that we would like to do. And so I see that. And then I also see it from the other parts of our division too that also get short shrift. I will say that, you know, with other, when I first came to Somerville, I was very pleased with how much emphasis was put on preservation, and I still think a lot is put on compared to other communities. That said, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's an understanding of what it means, right? I think globally, it's not just about the pretty houses, right? It's about a lot of other things. And so that has been, you know, a big, you know, it's a big internal effort also to, you know, try to get people understand that. But then you also, but we need to look at it in a more comprehensive, like global way and how it fits into everything else. So, you know, those have been some of the things that I've tried to work on and push over the years as well. So yes, I think that you will find, just like, you know, whether it's our buildings and, you know, not having a budget to work on our buildings, or if it's not having, you know, plans or initiatives approved, or if it's, you know, a kick up in construction or a slowdown in construction. I mean, we're constantly shifting. It's like the sands are constantly shifting under our feet and we're reacting to it. And, you know, we want to be more about planning as opposed to reacting, right? And I think I've told you this, you guys, many times, that it constantly feels like, you know, that we end up having to try to react when we want to designate, you know, places. And we'd like to be much more proactive about it. So in order to do that, since there's no solution from a staffing problem at this point, then I think the question remains is then how can we divvy up some of the work and tasks to the commission for this creation. Now, the state law requires the commission to do it, right? Which is you guys. But a commission is also empowered to designate that responsibility to its staff, right? To have a designee, which is what you do. So knowing that the majority of our time, I say 80 to 90% of our time in historic is spent reviewing and approving or writing reports or researching applications for the commission, 90% of our time. So, now that we have a couple of new staff members, we've tried to sort of like reduce the amount of time that Wendy has to spend doing that, for example. And you know that I spent all my time doing that before. So what can we do? And maybe this isn't something we can answer tonight. What can the commission do as far as like taking on some of these other designation tasks or work that staff can't get to? I mean, staff can help you, you know, decide your priority, and, you know, we can help you, you know, teach you how to do like some of the research and, you know, show you how to access some of the information and what we need to know about and whatnot. And try to do it as a collaborative effort in that fashion.
Talk about just a little general, the process, so we can identify where the time requirements are. I know there's a big one is writing the reports, the surveys.
The big one is the surveys, right? So that's where it's very, very research heavy and very research intensive. So
and some of those are done, like Union Square, that's all been surveyed, isn't
it? Yeah, that's done.
Okay.
So when it comes to Partridge, for example, one of the things. Go ahead.
Glenwood.
Oh God, Partridge is right there, and I always think Partridge. Thank you. Yes, Glenwood. So, you know, when it comes to Glenwood, I know that y'all had mentioned, you know, that you were interested in the mansards. And one of the things that we find is that you define the boundaries, right, which are all the mansards on that street. And then sometimes you find as you go through and you're doing your research that, oh, geez, maybe the other one, you know, maybe it's worth doing the other ones as well, or looking into some of the other ones. But you have to start with what you've defined first, right, which are the mansards. So for each property, you need to trace the history of the land, right, back as far as you can. So that's research in the Registry of Deeds. Then it's like the construction of the structure itself, you know, taking a look at the historic maps. So, you know, for how long was it vacant land? When did it change? Who owned it? What were the transfers of land? How did that happen? Who were the people that owned the land? Who were the people that built the property, or at least that sold it and then separated it into like individual building lots? Were they done on spec? Were they done purposefully? And then you have to dig into the personal history of who built those houses or who had owned the land and then partitioned it. And then the personal history, you have to go through all the census data from, well, as far back as you can go. I mean, these aren't going to go back super far, but like the latter half of the 19th century. And you have to look at the census data like every 10 years for the federal census. You can look at the Massachusetts state census too. That can be edifying. But there's one year where the federal census was lost due to a fire. And so then you take a look at who these people are, and each census tells you something different. Whether or not they could read or write, which we take for granted today, but that was like a big deal back in the day, especially if like these were like, you know, fresh immigrants, for example. Could they read or write English? Where were they born? Did they own the property? Did they rent the property? All those little details tell you something about the person, and then tell you about the history of that site and the city as well. Oh, wow, you owned your property outright. It was a freehold, which means you had no mortgage on it, et cetera. And that meant something, right? That meant that you didn't have that enormous debt that maybe a lot of other people did have. That showed that maybe you had, quote unquote, gotten somewhere in your journey through the US, like if you were an immigrant, or even if you weren't, that you had, you know, it showed something about where your place was economically. And then, you know, what other things did you do? So we look through things such as all the historic newspapers. We run searches through them. We run searches through the historic photographs in collections at like Boston Public Library, Historic New England, et cetera. So all those little nuggets that you see in your reports are the results of some of that work that we've done on these properties. And so then you have to obviously go through like the whole architectural description, show what's changed, what hasn't, its relationship to the street, et cetera. So it's when Wendy first came here, she was like bowled over at the amount of work that we put into these demolition reports. Because the amount of work that we put into the demolition reports here in Somerville is where she comes from, they would put into doing a designation.
That's what I was just wondering. To what extent are we basically doing that work anyway? Like,
so, right. So for these demo cases, we do a lot of that work. But if we were taking one of these properties and wanted to make it into a local historic district, we would do even more work beyond that, right? To make sure that we have everything ticked and tied. We have to look in all the city directories, the business directories, the residential directories, et cetera. If people were renting, if they were not, et cetera. If you think back to when we did the Upper Central Street Local Historic District, and the catalyst for that, the doctor that owned that house on Central Street, and then, you know, founded and ran the hospital that's now, I don't know, 400 or 404, I think it's 400. It's 404 Broadway. Anyhow, all that information is what we would, you know, certainly put in an LHD report. But what that showed us was that, like, oh my God, in one of the census takings during the Depression, there were like 17 people living in the house, and that told part of the story, right? So all that stuff that we take and then explain, and not just put down facts, but what those facts mean, right? The other thing is, sorry, just one more thing. When you do a local historic district, the other thing is that it all has to tie together. So local historic district can be architecturally associated, right? It can be thematically associated, right? And so the Central Street, the one that we most recently did on Central, showed the progression architecturally right? From, I think it was like, from Greek revival onward. But there was a thematic, so that was a thematic tie-in, right? And the thematic tie-in too was also the ownership of the land and how it got distributed, and then how those other houses that had been single districts were built, and then really, in the end, it really tied into a very important grouping of structures that was related, that show progression architecturally, but was related thematically in terms of ownership, construction, and economic changes. So,
And so you're suggesting that commissioners, the volunteer commissioners, would take on these research and writing tasks
so that's what I mean, is that is,
as gratis at no cost?
so I'm not suggesting that you should, but I'm just saying that Eric asked, well, what could we, you know, how do we do, what do we do? That, so that you know, that is one of the things that we do. That's how we get every single one of these things before you.
I understand there's a tremendous amount of work,
Yeah.
but the idea is that it's a professional department that can
Mhm.
hire people trained to do these things who are going to be more effective and efficient at doing them than, you know, as well-intentioned as any of us might be, as, you know, we already have, each of us has full-time jobs.
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
And so, you know, to take on something like that, you know, like, oh, I'll go to the, you know, the registry of deeds, because none of that's online.
Oh, yeah, no, it's all online.
Not
all
as
the
old
research-
as what you're asking for. I'm in the registry of deeds,
Yeah.
database all the time.
Yeah.
So
There's ways to dig, and it gets a little complicated after a while.
So-
especially with this one, but
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
so-
just can't fathom any one of us. I don't know. I will speak for myself. I can't fathom, you know, devoting
right. Yeah.
40 to 100 hours to
Yeah.
this as a
Exactly.
volunteer. That's not okay. I pay enough in property taxes, and, you know, we spend enough time without being paid commissioners, as some
Yep.
other commissions we understand do get paid.
Yes, they do.
And so that's not okay. So we need a proposal as to how to get the resources that the Historic Commission needs to get its work done. Because this is not optional. When there are properties that need to be protected, they need to be protected. And that work needs to be done. And it is not going, I'm not going to feel guilty because I'm not willing to, you know, commit all of my free time to
No,
a volunteer
nor
project
should
like
you.
this.
Nor
So
should you. Well,
we
hold
need-
on 1 sec. Nor should you. And I'm not saying that you guys should go out and do this.
To
I-
suggest
And-
that the commission members do this work, I find this a ridiculous conversation.
I'm not
And
suggesting.
what's
that
the
you should
end
do
point
it.
here? What are we trying to accomplish right now? I
Right.
think we need to move on. I agree with Robin's point of view, though. I mean, you know, this, you know, to learn in particular too, that other commissions are paid. And then the city, I hear this all the time from the city, oh, we don't have enough resources, this, that, and the other, and people that should volunteer to do these sorts of things. I think it's very insulting, to hear that put forth this way. I feel that we should have a different kind of a conversation.
So
Yeah,
we need to understand, how do we put this forward to, I don't know if, you know, Sarah needs to put something forward. I don't know if, you know, we individually need to be speaking with our city councilors. Like, how do we
So I
make
think,
a proposal?
so I think the conversation needs to be, and by the way, I was not trying to insinuate that you guys do that work. Eric had asked me a question about the type
yeah.
of work that's
Also-
involved, so that was my answer. So
There's
you
some
guys, I'm not saying you
questioning-
guys should do it.
I think for the benefit of the folks, any members of the public who are suffering through this conversation with us, a little outline of that. And in the past, in my experience, the last time we actually paid professional people to do this was it Ed Gordon? He used to do a lot of this. That was way back when I first signed up. Like, I think
He's retired.
But do you remember offhand, like how much what the going rate on a survey is?
I know that, I was talking to a colleague in another, community, and they pay $500 per property.
Okay, so
That's,
However,
that sounds really cheap. Let's do that.
it's great to, I know, it's wonderful to know how cheap I am. And I
No,
don't,
but I mean, like, we're talking
but-
about 17 properties. Okay, so that can be accomplished for under 10 grand, the whole
So-
thing for Glenwood?
so,
Let's do it.
okay, hold on. We also don't get to just go out and say, hey, we want to hire a consultant for this. It has to be in our budget to do it. Okay, we don't have the free cash to just go around and say, like,
How do
okay,
we get it in the budget is the question.
okay, so I understand what you're saying. And what I'm also saying is I'm not saying that we are not going to finish part of Glenwood. We're just not going to finish Glenwood by June.
Right?
But Glenwood will be the next. Glenwood is the next big one that we handle after we.
Right, but you've
handle-
indicated that there's no bandwidth existing in either the budget or the staff to actually be able to do anything in fiscal 25.
No,
And
no, no, no,
so-
no, 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 I'm sorry,
Okay.
but no, you misunderstand. It is going to have to be allocated out to staff. We have to figure out where it fits in with the other items that are also kind of pretty high priority for historic, such
Okay.
as the 50% demo
Yeah,
issue, right? That's a pretty big one right now, like emergency level issue.
but that would seem like, isn't that, I mean, I don't know how the work gets distributed, but I would imagine like maybe you and Wendy are on that, but it's not like every person in historic is working on that issue.
Correct. So,
Right.
so this is probably better because we should probably move this along, but this is probably better for an offline conversation about how, what and how we distribute work, because this is also just a portion of everything else that we have to do because we don't get to be just dedicated to historic, which is frustrating.
So
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is we need to understand what resources are needed in order to be able to move things forward, like a Glenwood, which has now been sort of in our awareness for a year. I mean, it's been a while. So, as things come up and, how does any of this get accomplished? What is needed? Is it more hands on deck? Is it having, a portion of the budget sort of ready to go for consultants? So
I think so we will be tackling Glenwood regardless, starting this FY25, which starts in July. So time and resources will be allocated for that. I think that what needs to happen is that if the commission wants to consider additional LHDs, that you identify them and prioritize which ones you want to have tackled first, right? Have a priority order and a reasoning for your priority order. And then we should talk about what you're looking to do and ideally by when you'd like to have it done, knowing that, and then that will give us an idea of what your priorities are. So then we can look internally and say, okay, so coming up, what are we going to need budget wise? Are we going to need consultants to do some of this work in order to get these other, desired districts done that the commission wants to do?
okay, the other question that I have is because staff works across departments all the time, and you guys see the activity and the pressures in different parts of the city, different neighborhoods, et cetera. You often have an awareness that before we do of what localities are more at risk and danger, right? In terms of how things have been rezoned, like this is an area that people are going to be targeting because it's just been upzoned, and there's now a lot more like this 382 Broadway. That's the kind of information that would be really helpful from staff, is to say, hey guys, like this is, these are the areas that are going to be under pressure. You know, let's figure out, are there properties that need to be protected, so that we don't end up with a situation like a 382. So I think it's one thing to ask us to come forward with, proposals for areas to study, et cetera, but you guys are doing this full time, all the time, working across departments. And so you have an understanding of sort of where the next sort of where the developers are going to be trying to go. It's
yeah. So I mean, sometimes, yeah, yes and no. And then, I mean, but you have, and so I think, this is also why we want to work on some incentives for like density in districted properties, right? Because like right, the intent is not to close down all development, right? It's to allow for greater density within those existing buildings. Think about the one on Bow Street a few years ago. I want to say it was like 40 Bow. It was a districted property. It needed a friend. And I forget how many units it had in it. I think maybe it had 4 and they increased it to 6 and they did an addition, et cetera, et cetera. And it worked out well. So like those types of things are things that I think that we would probably like to consider and engage with. So, but I think that while we can see some things, right, like the Broadway corridor itself, well, within a certain area, I mean, it's only a Broadway corridor. It's real, it's a couple of sides of Broadway, but it's really the Broadway corridor roughly from like Magoon Square to a bit past maybe to Temple Street-ish, just about, which maybe that's something that you want to consider. But we do need input, because what we see is one thing, but what you all see as residents and those who live in the community is something else, right? So we do need definitely from you all.
understood. I just wanted to be sure and clear that that's a piece that I would hope staff is also, that the LHD, like, let's explore this, shouldn't just be coming from us. But I feel like because the department is overwhelmed and underfunded, that no one's suggesting, because it just creates more work. I mean, this is taking us how many months and how many requests to have this conversation around this. We keep getting pushback, Sarah. And, I understand everybody's overworked, but the first time we talked about Glenwood, there were threats of quitting. And that was a direct sort of like put the kibosh on the whole conversation, which is not okay. This is what we have to do. This is part of the work. And so if the commission is not properly funded or supported, then let's figure out how to, rattle the cages of the appropriate people so that it can get done. Because otherwise, what are we doing? It just, and for us to sit here and, going around and around and around, just saying like, oh, it's hard to do, and not actually getting stuff done isn't productive. So I really would like some direction as to, what you guys think, because you know how things operate and what your budget season looks like and what's already allocated and whatever. But what needs to be allocated, who needs to be talked to, and how do we get this done?
And we can tell you definitely what we think. And I think that that's one of the things that we did with Glenwood, when I know you were interested in designation. And I know that we had talked about it internally beforehand, and the conversation, I forget who brought it up first, but that's definitely something we've been thinking about. Smith Ave is one of the things that we did a few years ago that it was initiated by staff. But that's fine. And working together on it, I think is the goal, or should be the goal, right? Definitely not just, we can definitely tell you what we see. But we do need to, we want to know what you what you all want to designate as well, beyond when it comes up with a demo, right? So take a look at all the demos that you've seen, for example, over the last year or the last 2 years. What does that tell you? Are there other areas that, because of what you have seen and that from like your intimate knowledge of the city, that you think that you might want to go around and look and consider that might need to be designated? But some of that we definitely need some of that from you all too. I'll take this conversation obviously back internally, and talk about it, and see, what's possible, what's not possible, from a funding standpoint. And then I think that the other thing that needs to be considered too is, especially when it comes to Union Square, it'll be a heavy lift from the part of the commission when it comes to, you might need to hold like more than one public hearing and do like public information sessions and things like that. Hold a meeting, something like this, where people can ask questions, much like you did when we did the Upper Central Street LHD as well. Because they can talk to us, certainly, but I think interacting with the commission that they will have to deal with will be important as well.
On the question of Union Square, since those reports are written, what outside of those meetings, what heavy lifting's left to do on that?
So the surveys have been done. The report will go in by the end of the fiscal year. There's nothing pre-submission that we need the commission for, but knowing that you will have to hold public hearings, you have to hold one by law, no less than 60 days after we get confirmation that the state has received the report. I think that it would be beneficial, and this is something that I brought up with the commission several times over the years, to come up with a presentation about, what you think, could be helpful to present to the public that might not know about what a local historic district is, who you are, what you do, how you work with staff, the types of things that you review, etc. And I think that would be really good if you wanted to put some drafts of that together, and then we can iterate on that.
But I think it's models or templates that other commissions have used, formats or things that might be helpful for us to take a look at and reference.
I think that probably have been. I mean, even just like a Google search. Honestly, that's how I find them all, because like there's no like coalition of us that like share things together. Are you talking about internally?
No, I mean, so for example, you're suggesting that this commission does it. I'm wondering if other commissions have done this, if other boards have created the kind of thing that you're talking about, it would be helpful to be able to see something as an example of what you're talking about.
Do you mean other LHD HPCs in the state, or are you talking about?
I mean in Somerville. So again, with the idea that, we're trying to make everything consistent around, stuff. If, other commissioners have gotten together as a writing and craft project to put together a presentation, it would be helpful to have a reference point to go with.
Yeah, no, that's
again, this sounds like something that staff should be doing. It does not sound like something that commissioners should be, like crafting, like, oh, I'll do the point project.
So the other boards and commissions do not. HPCs are different because the responsibility does lie with the commissions themselves. And yes, staff, does do a lot of that work. But I think that, if the ask has been, what can the commission do? I think that there are some things that the commission can do, such as you know, maybe it's like we meet together and I say to you, okay, what types of things do you think you would want to explain to someone? Maybe you just write a list and say, I think these are the things that the public should need to know about, you know, what it means working with the commission, what we do, etc. Because you're also going to be able to need to answer the questions in a public hearing. You know, it won't be staff who will be able to do it. So I think that, you know, writing out what you think is important for people to know, especially if it's, you know, especially if it's an area, like, let's say it's an area that's really opposed to being in an LHD. You know, how do you explain, you know, what it is, and how do you correctly counter, you know, misstatements, or how do you demystify, and how do you explain what happens and what goes on? I think that being prepared for that, at least, is something that is worth all of you thinking about. And at a minimum, coming up with, you know, some ideas about what you would like to see in such a presentation. Right? And then if that means that staff throws it together in a template for you and gives it to you and says, okay, this is what it's going to be. But I think having a combination of staff and commission explaining what happens or answering questions is really going to be key.
I suppose we ought to conclude that. We've got some minutes to go through and a CPC update, but I mean, we had a discussion of this. Is there anything else?
No.
Ryan or Denise, you want to add? Okay,
No, if you want to have a one-on-one, I'm more than happy to.
sure.
Just email me.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, the only other items we have are the minutes and CPC update. I don't remember what order those two things come in, but I'll give you a quick CPC update, which is that we're going through the process of outreach, just kind of letting the public know what we do, tabling, stuff like that. Trying to find ways to get people aware that the CPC is out there, interested in applying for grants, stuff like that. So that's where we are. And any questions about the CPA?
Thank you.
Okay. And then the minutes. Have people had a chance to read the minutes?
Yeah, I had no comments or corrections.
I didn't either.
Comments.
Okay.
I move that we vote to approve the meeting minutes for April 2nd.
Second that.
Moved by Vice Chair Kelly, second by Mr. Falvey. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? We'll do the roll call. Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Ms. Price,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. That's everything. So I mean, the takeaway on the district discussion is I think we need to work back and forth with staff and find ways to nudge the city to providing the resources we need to move this forward. It's very important. And other than that, I think we're ready to adjourn the meeting.
I move that we vote to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Vice Chair Kelly, seconded by Ms. Price to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do a roll call of Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Ms. Price,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. And we have it. Thank you all. Thank you, Sarah, if you're still tagging along, for giving us our discussion about that with us.
Yeah,
Go
thanks,
on.
Stephen and Kristen, too.
Yes, thank you. All righty.
Okay, good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
guys. Thanks.
Night.